So I hope you enjoyed that segment of how I built my whole bushcraft camp. I realise there's probably quite a few questions that some of you might want to ask and that some of you have asked throughout the previous episodes. One of which is the tools. So I'm going to run through some of the tools that I've used. Other questions are about permission and how I've got permission to build that where I have. And just general other questions like the species of trees and everything and wood that I was using. So I think we'll start off just talking about the tools that I was using. So essentially this is the four main tools that I use. We'll start with this one over here. We've got a small folding saw. That was the original saw that I started out with. A knife. This was again the original knife that I started out with. High carbon steel knife. Hatchet, just an 18-inch hatchet with a 2-pound head. And towards the end you might have noticed a larger saw, which is more of a folding bow saw. Believe it or not, I built most of my camp with this small folding, it's a pruning saw, like a garden pruning saw. As you can see, the blade is completely battered. This is still the original blade that I've had on it, which I've been using for 2 years now. It definitely needs a change. The anodized coatings come off, the sort of anti-stick coating, and the teeth some are fairly sharp, but most of them are completely blunt. But do you know what, for the price, I can't remember what I paid for this. I think it was about £15. It just did the job. It was perfect, especially when I was starting out building the camp originally and just building that first fire reflector. Folds in on itself, small and compact. This one's called the Barco Laplander. I'll pop links to all these tools in the video description below if you guys are interested in them. This is called the Barco Laplander, and it's not the greatest saw in the world obviously, but it's just very portable and compact and lightweight. So the knife I was using was the TBS bore, which is basically the first real proper sort of bushcraft knife that I ever bought. I was using this for at least the first, I'd say 10 camp updates. This one, I've made the custom fire steel that comes with it. There's just a red deer antler at the top with a bit of bungee cord here to secure it in. That's just one I've made. I just bought the fire steel blank itself. The leather sheath obviously came with it when I purchased it. It's a fairly hefty blade for a bushcraft knife. It's quite a long blade, I think it's about 4 inches. Same with the handle, about 4 inches. Scandinavian grind. This is high carbon steel, K720 bowler steel, but it's done me really, really well, and I've really enjoyed using this knife. The handle itself is Turkish walnut. It did have a matching Turkish walnut fire steel, but I don't have that anymore, I lost it. But either way, it's been a great knife and it's served me well over the camp update series. Towards the end of the camp update series, I've been using a newer knife, which is made for me by a Canadian knife maker called Sam. His knife company is called Virtus Knives, and this one is the Virtus Utilis. It's got spalted maple scales. It's got this like ancient finish on it, which I really like. I think it's a great touch. But this has been really well used as well. Towards the later end of the camp update series, what Sam does really well on this knife is the file work. He's actually filed that full tang there, the end of that tang by the handle, to make it look incredible with that pattern. It has got black liners on it, but he's also filled it in with dyed epoxy, I believe, in the gaps to give it that effect. And it's got some really nice mosaic pins there. This is just more of a very good looking knife, but it's also been very practical. It's had really good use. This one came with a Kydex sheath, but I also used it in my TBS bore sheath as the fire steel sort of matched the thing there. Just something I liked doing. These knives are amazing, but also they're fairly expensive. So if you're starting out with bushcraft, you might want something like this, which is just a Mora Companion. This is my Mora Companion. These are probably one of the best value for money knives out there that you can get. Again, I'll pop all links in the video description below. This one is actually the carbon version. It doesn't have a 90-degree spine as such. You can file it down to make it work. I've made it work on a fire steel, but you might want to file that one down. But these have probably the best grip of a knife that I've ever used. Really, really nice, comfortable, ergonomic grip. Great little knife, much more of a sort of beginner's knife to start out with. So if you're looking to get into bushcraft and starting out for a beginner, this is probably one of the good knives for you. There's also the Mora Bushcraft as well, which is again another great value for money knife. You will have noticed that throughout that whole episode that you just watched, if you're still sticking by, thanks very much, you will have noticed that I was using the same hatchet from episode 1 a number of years ago. I've had this for a long time, this axe. Episode 1 I've been using the same hatchet, which is a Husqvarna hatchet hobby. It's about an 18-inch handle, I think. Pretty sure it's a 2-pound head. It's a fairly heavy head for a small hatchet. I lost the sheath that came with it, but Brian, my friend at Journeyman Handcraft, he custom made this sheath, which fits perfectly. This has had an absolute battering, and to be honest now it's fairly blunt and it needs a sharpen because I've not sharpened it in a long time. But this is up there with probably one of the best value for money hatchets. Towards the latter stages of the Bushcraft Camp Update series, I think it was Camp Update 11 onwards, I got myself the Agawa Canyon, the Boreal 21 by Agawa Canyon. Now this is an incredible saw. It's a folding bow saw, so it packs nice and sort of thin. It is fairly heavy, but not too much. It's heavy compared to this, but it does a lot more work. And the way this works is it just folds out on itself. It all tucks into one system. Pull it right round. There's a little groove here on this part of the handle, if you can see that. The camera will focus. There's the sort of groove. You tuck that groove at the bottom of the bow saw there, and the handle then folds in and locks, and then that tensions the blade. This blade, the one that I'm using, is the Sydney Rancher blade. Again, still the original blade, so I've used this for quite a few episodes. It is starting to dull, but it cuts through bigger logs much faster, and that's what I needed really to build that hunting tower, because it would have taken such a long time with this little thing. I think with this thing I tried to do it on one of the tower pillars, and it took 20 minutes or 25 minutes just to do one log. So this only takes a minute, maybe a minute and a half. Much easier. But again, it's going to last longer and it's going to help you cut more firewood in the winter. This would be much better in the winter where you need that firewood. To put it in perspective for you guys, you don't need expensive tools to be able to build a camp like I've done. I've done this fairly on the cheap. Really, for the first 10 episodes at least, these were the only two main tools I used. A hatchet that's I think £25 and a folding saw that was £15. That's really all I used, to be honest, and a bit of cheap cordage to get going with building the bushcraft camp. So it just goes to show you don't need really expensive tools. Yes, the more expensive tools are definitely going to last you longer, and if you treat them right, you know, they're going to be a better tool. But if budget and cost is on your conscience and it's something on your mind, then these for me have been brilliant, and you can tell because you've seen the big sort of bushcraft camp that I built from using these. Just wanted to touch on cordage. I didn't actually bring any cordage out here with me today, but just to go through some of the cordage I used. I started out with using paracord, which although is very tough, I found that paracord, when you try to cinch it down sometimes, certain knots and certain lashings that you do, it can slip because of that outer coating on the paracord. That's just personal experience. You guys might have found something different from that. You know, you might some people swear by paracord and they use it all the time. I also used string to begin with, and that was brilliant. That actually held up really well. It pinched down on itself. It was just a typical sort of garden string, or it wasn't decorative string. It was fairly tough. I can't remember what it was because it was a few years ago now, but that held up really well. And there was still the original string on one of the fire reflectors that I built to begin with. That was still there up until Camp Update 12, I think, or maybe even 13, when I cut it off and redid it. So that's a few years that lasted. I've been using a bit of jute twine as well, which it's not very good for strength. It's more of a sort of decorative and natural cordage that if the camp fell down and blew down in the wind, and obviously it will rot over the years, the jute twine will break down with it as well over the years. Other cordage I used was polyprop. You saw my dad using some polyprop rope. Obviously not great for the environment, but if anything falls down, we always take the polyprop rope away. But it is very tough and it's cheap. It's really cheap. It's a good sort of budget option. I would say bank line is probably one of the best cordage you can get. It's just got a really good mixture of all of those pieces of cordage, you know, the paracord and tough. It's a tough material, durable, but it knots really well. It cinches down really well. However, it is quite expensive. So that's the cordage part. I get a lot of questions about the trees that I'm using and how they grow, how I get such straight wood. So firstly, let's just talk about the tree itself. The tree a point I need to make is that no living trees were cut down during that whole camp. Everything you see in that camp itself is not living wood. It's just, I'd never cut down a living tree when I was doing that camp. That's just the way it was. I don't really want to cut down it, although that woodland is so dense, it sort of needs managing. It needs trees to be cut down to allow the other trees more light and, you know, get that light hitting the forest floor, just help the biodiversity a little bit more. But the tree itself that I've been using in that camp, and the reason it grows so straight, is the Scots pine, or Pinus sylvestris is its Latin name, and it's actually one of the only native pines here to the UK. Because it's so straight, because the woodland's so dense, and when woodlands are so dense, trees are fighting for the light, and that's why they grow so tall and straight, because they're trying to get to the sunlight. They're competing with each other. When you see a tree out in the open field, it's generally a big sort of bushy tree, and it's open because it's got no competition from surrounding trees, so it doesn't need to fight for sunlight. Whereas these ones, they're so dense that they've got to keep growing up straight as possible to get to that sunlight, and that's the reason the wood is so straight. Scots pine is really easy to identify. I'll just go and show you now. So even in this woodland, just here where I am, there's a lot of evergreens, there's a lot of conifer sort of trees, but this here is a Scots pine, and it's fairly easy to identify. A number of things. The bark itself on the more mature trees has these big large fissures, like big cracks in the bark, and you can break it off generally, you know, like this. And although the bark is resinous, it's actually quite hard to light. You're better off getting the sort of fat wood in the joints here. But one of the most notable things for the Scots pine is that it starts on mature trees. It starts really dark, sort of brown at the bottom, and as you get higher it gets more orange. You can't see it as much on this one, but over here, on this one here, you'll see it starts brown, and then it starts to go more orange there, see? But there, the colour fades a little bit more. You can almost see the colour break here, where it's dark just here, and then it starts to go more brown and orange as you go up. So this is what the needles look like on the Scots pine. They tend to grow in pairs. If you look at this one here, if I can get it for you, this is quite a young shoot, but they grow together in pairs like that. And Scots pine needles you can use in tea. It's a good sort of bushcraft tea, but that's how you can identify them as well, from the needles themselves. And also the branches of the needles tend to grow upwards, up into the air, so not down like this. They tend to poke up and stick up, and you can see that from this tree just here. Just there, you can see they're starting to grow up, and that's because they're looking for the light. That's another way of identifying the Scots pine tree. One of the main questions I get, especially from guys over here in the UK, is permission, and how do you get permission to build a camp like that? It's quite a difficult thing really, because generally in the UK it's about who you know. We've got a sort of very high population here in the UK. For such a small island, I think the UK has something like 65 million people. There's 8 million people in London alone. And I've got a friend over in Sweden who I was fishing with 2 years ago, and he says obviously Sweden's got a bigger land mass than the UK, and in Sweden alone there's 8 million people, or around 8.5, maybe 9 million people. So the amount of people in the whole of Sweden are in just London alone, which is crazy. You know, we've got so many people here in our country, in England as well, which makes finding permission really hard. Woodlands are quite sparse as well. They're either all privately owned, or they're owned by the National Trust, or big you know, woodland companies and things like that. So it's very difficult to find permissions. What I would say, if you're looking to get permission, is farmers can be a good option, because if you go and ask a farmer, you can't just turn up on someone's land and expect them to say, yeah, sure, you know, come and build a camp, come and have fire, come and cut down trees. That's not going to happen. What you could do is maybe go to local farmers and say, look, I'm really interested in bushcraft and I enjoy spending time in the woods. I've noticed you've got a woodland. Would you be able to let me spend some time in your woodland, either making films or practicing bushcraft, and I'll help you out with farm work? And if the farmer says yes, well, you sort of win twofold. You get two benefits from it. Not only do you potentially get permission to use his woodland or use her woodland to practice bushcraft and things like that, but you also get an opportunity to work on a farmland and gain that experience and knowledge of how farming works and where your food comes from and just things like that. That's just one of the tips I have. I'm not promising you that it will work, but you just, wherever you go, you lose nothing by asking permission. All you're going to get is a no. if you don't ask at all, you gain nothing. You're never going to know. So don't be afraid to be declined. Go out there, ask permission, get declined. It doesn't matter. You might ask 5, 6, 7 times for the different landowners' permissions. Eventually, one might be kind enough to offer you some volunteer work. You know, there's no harm in asking. Always ask. Just to make this clear, my camp is on private land, and I do have permission. And also the cabin, the palletwood cabin, that's on private land, and we've got permission to build there as well. One of the final questions is, how long has it taken me to build this camp? And that's such a difficult question to answer, because I don't really know, because I've been building it on and off for years, for the last maybe 2.5 years. So each time, when I first started out, each time I'd go there, it would be for maybe 3 or 4 hours at a time, and I'd just build something, cook up some food, maybe put a tea or a coffee on, and that was that. It was just time enjoyed in the woods. And then other times towards the end of the camp update series, or the latter stages, I would go there for, you know, a full day, stay the night, and then do another full day. So I can't really put a time on it. It's just, it just is what it is. I just built it whenever I had the time to, and it's the same with most people. You know, the majority of people out there can't go and build that in just a couple of days. You know, people are working, people have jobs, they've only got weekend time or evenings and things like that. So realistically, it is going to take time. You can't just expect to build that overnight. It takes a long time. I think we're there. I think I've asked most of your questions. If you have any other questions, please pop them in the comments section below. I try to read as many comments as possible. I appreciate this is a long video, and it's featured some of the stuff you may have seen before. But I'm just very grateful to have you all as my subscribers. You're all very loyal. You've been incredible. You've given some great feedback over the years, and I really appreciate it. And it's been great to also see how much this camp update series has inspired some of you, and how much of a positive impact it's had on you. So I really appreciate that. And if you're relatively new to the channel and you want to go back and watch the full camp update series of episode 1 to 13, then I'll pop a link in the video description below, and also the little eye icon in the corner of your screen now. You can click that, and that will take you to the full playlist, where you can watch not only how I build it, but also my journey through building it, where my experiences of things that were wrong and things that I changed, and you know, how I felt about certain things, and just how you'll even see my knowledge of bushcraft develop as you watch from episode 1 towards episode 13, where I've just taught myself new things over the years. I really appreciate you watching this. Thank you so much. Remember to tick that little bell if you are subscribed, just so you can get the notifications when I do upload. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon in the next episode. you.